All right, folks, I think we'll get started here now. Thanks everyone for being here. Today we're talking about automated builds using Jenkins for embedded. Just real quick about me. I'm Joe Schneider, family man, dad of 3 girls, amazing wife, embedded software for 20 years, done multiple agile transformations, and just a passion for improving state of the art, and especially in embedded. Dojo 5 real quick is embedded software exports out to modernize the firmware lifecycle. Dojo being an environment for immersive learning and 5 being a foundation and family. A product and services company based in St. Paul, Minnesota, where it's not cold right now. Okay, so the plan today, we're going to set up Jenkins, figure out how that goes, do a hello world CI, and then hello world embedded CI. So talk about the differences between just getting CI set up in an initial hello world environment and then get it set up for embedded to help you guys get going quickly and easily with Jenkins. All right, so some concepts first. You got to decide how you're going to host this thing. Is it going to be on AWS, Google's cloud, Azure, or are you going to be hosting it in the cloud with some other providers like Heroku, DigitalOcean, Linode? There's a bunch of others. You can also host it on-prem, and some companies, IT groups and others, they really want to do things internally, protect those assets. So luckily, I can show you how Jenkins could be hosted. I think a lot of this applies to how Jenkins can be hosted in a lot of other places too, but we'll show this using DigitalOcean today. Another concept we're going to be introducing today is a tool called Docker. If you're not familiar with them, maybe you are familiar with virtual machines. This is a way to run a machine inside of another machine as software. So in a virtual machine environment, which are more kind of a traditional technology, the entire computer is running. It's like an emulator. It's running the CPU, and it's running the instructions for that CPU, and then and you can do things with VMware or VirtualBox that you can boot up a Windows machine running on a Mac that's running on a Linux machine. You can go multiple layers deep as long as you have enough memory and CPU. Docker is the result of people seeing that technology and the value that it had, but realizing that it was very heavyweight. And then some folks in the Linux world had figured this out a number of years earlier and had created some tools, C groups and some others that were able to kind of emulate this in a lot of ways, a virtual machine, but do it in a lighter weight way. And a way that doesn't require you to reserve 8 gigs of RAM for the one Windows machine or one Linux box that's running on top of your host OS. And so containers were conceived of, and Docker kind of popularized them and made them easy to use. And really, you can think of a container as a software unit or a packaged software unit. So it includes a complete file system. So the file system that an application running inside the container sees is completely separate from your host computer. So you can control everything that's in there. You can version it and make sure it's a clean environment. And then inside of a container, you typically only have one app running, but it runs within this container, and it can have virtualized network. It can have virtualized, as I mentioned, hard drive or the file system, and then I can have virtualized RAM, and so it's protected. And it's running almost like it's in a virtual environment, but it still runs on your host PC, and it's fairly lightweight. It's lightweight enough to so that you can run like 10 containers or 20 containers or 30 containers. And a lot of web developers and mobile developers will use this to simulate kind of these large microservices types of environments that you typically see in the web development world. And so they are able to use these environments to kind of to not only simulate then on their computer development environment, but also many people now use this container technology to deploy to the website and actually run in production. We found that by packaging everything into a container, they can kind of isolate certain pieces of the system, version control them separately. It becomes a nice deployment mechanism. Yeah, And we'll see in a sec how this actually helps us from a embedded standpoint control the kind of the data that's or control the ability to have a reproducible, repeatable, reliable build yeah, for the embedded world. Okay, so embedded Jenkins, just kind of concepts. We have primary and workers in Jenkins. Jenkins is a build automation tool. You can think of it like, you know, if you've set your build up to run once when you, like just by pressing a button or running one script and then it runs your entire build, Jenkins is a tool that helps you automate that over time. So now it's a tool that you typically install on a computer and it runs all the time, and it typically monitors your source control repo, whether that's GitHub or just some local Git instance or Bitbucket or whatever. And when it sees that somebody's pushed some code, it runs a series of steps for you. It can also run these on a nightly basis as well. But that's its job, is to kind of be your butler. That's why they've got the Jenkins image there. It's your automation tool that helps you do a number of run your sequence, run your firmware factory. It has a primary, which is presents a web interface that helps you run through Jenkins, and there's also a series of workers that actually do the work. And the worker can be on the same computer as the primary, or it could be on a separate computer, different from the primary. And so these two folks work together in order to build your software. I'm also showing kind of a hardware in the loop demonstration here. So the primary can also kick off another Jenkins runner that's running on something like a Raspberry Pi or some kind of low-cost hardware that can then be connected to actual dev kits boards that can then be running your tests on hardware. And there are some other considerations in the workers side of things too on how we set up embedded Jenkins. So, all right, so let's get into it. Let's try to set up Jenkins, and let's see how quickly and easily we can get into a hello world situation. As I mentioned before, we're going to use DigitalOcean to host this material, or this in the cloud. You can do this on-prem, but we're going to provision some cloud infrastructure, which allows us to basically get a new device sitting out in the cloud, and then we're gonna base it on the Docker Marketplace image. And here I'm going to, let's see, make sure I'm sharing my screen correctly so you can see us moving over. All right. So now you should be able to see kind of largely the same thing you were seeing, but now we're gonna jump into DigitalOcean here. All right, so DigitalOcean, like I mentioned, is just one of many host providers that can host stuff in the cloud. We're gonna create what they call a droplet. So this is a cloud server. And very cheap. That's the reason I picked this too, so that people could kind of play with this quickly and easily. All right, so we're gonna base our image on Ubuntu. And we can, actually there's a marketplace. We're gonna base we could start with Ubuntu and then we'd have to install Docker, but I don't wanna go through that today. So you can actually find in the marketplace an image that is Ubuntu with Docker pre-installed. So, and then we're just gonna choose a basic plan. Let's see, and we're gonna do, it's basically runs, if we let this run for 24/7 for a month, it's $5. And we get a gig of RAM, 25 gigs of disk space, 1,000 gigs of transfer, plenty for what we're doing now. Obviously, you can get quite a bit of speed, and if you did have to upgrade here, like they've got some pretty beefy machines too if you need to upgrade, but this little one is probably more than enough for most. We're gonna have ours hosted in New York. Frankfurt might be a little slow right now. And then let's see, we don't need any additional options. SSH keys. So I've already got an SSH key loaded in, so we didn't have to do that today, but you could, this is how we will connect to the device running in the cloud. If you haven't created an SSH key before, let me know. I would be happy to walk you through it. Just hit me up on email after this. We've got some resources on our website too that can help you through that. All right, then we're going to choose a host name. I'm going to pick a slightly easier to remember host name, Jenkins master. We'll start there, or we'll say Jenkins primary. I am striking all bad language from my okay, and then we don't need any backups either. So we'll create this droplet. It does take just a few seconds to provision, and then we'll be set to go. Let me now pull up. Let me pull up. Oops. Whoops. Let me now pull up. Where did my slides go? Yeah, here we go. All right. So here we are setting up Jenkins. All right. So here we are setting up Jenkins. Let's bring back the terminal here. All right. All right. So here we go. Now we've got we're ready to, we've got our primary. We should be able to do if we check the, yep, Jenkins primary is now up and running. Perfect. So we can do SSH into Jenkins primary. DO control, what is it? It is, oh, droplet, SSH, Jenkins primary. No, it's not. What is the command that I'm trying to remember? Oh, compute SSH. Yeah, so there's, we could create it here, but this is compute SSH. There we go. DO control, compute SSH Jenkins primary. All right. So it's just making sure first time you connect with anything over SSH, you're always going to get this fingerprint verification. And now that we are connected, now we're running. So this is a server running in the cloud, running Ubuntu, and specifically Ubuntu with Docker running on it. So we have access, if I type in Docker, we have access to the Docker daemon. All right, so then what's our next step? We want to set up Jenkins. That looks like, basically, we're going to use the Jenkins image, which is the way that Docker kind of talks about containers. There's a kind of an owner or namespace for the containers, and that's the first Jenkins. And then the second Jenkins is the name of the image, also happens to be the name of their organization. But Jenkins is a quick, easy image that we can own or use to get quickly up and running. Docker run. There's a lot of command line flags here. They're basically setting us up so that so this piece right here, -v, sets us up to save the information out of the Jenkins image. If you don't have this, it'll run great for a while, and then if you stop it and restart it, you'll lose all your settings and it will start kind of from scratch again. So this allows Jenkins to save things out into our host OS. It kind of maps a drive from inside the container to outside the container, and this is where it saves its information. 8080 is mapping a port from inside to outside, so that's where we're actually going to see the website hosted. And then 50,000 is another port that we need to map from inside to outside, and that's so that the Jenkins primary can talk to the Jenkins workers over this port 50,000. We're telling it to restart, so this is assuming that we want to run this Jenkins image over and over again, or running it as a service, always running in the cloud. And then here's where we're specifying the image, and then LTS is their long-term support tag. So this just kind of says we want the long-term support version. So let's run that real quick. Let's grab it from here. All right. And so what we do first is we grab all of the Jenkins layers. This is how Docker works. There's a bunch of layers that kind of are accumulated together, almost overlays that are kind of placed on top of each other to create your image. And it downloaded Jenkins, and now it's running. If we do a Docker PS, you can see that, and which just kind of shows what images are running or what containers are running. Here we have Jenkins running, and there's our port mappings that we created. And so if we jump over to, where did our DigitalOcean page go? Yep, so here's our IP address that we're running at. So we can actually just pull up and 5050, I'm sorry, 8080. And ta-da, Jenkins is getting ready to work. So we have Jenkins running. Hooray. So I just want to note here too that this is not a secure installation. One piece that we've jumped over at this point, just for speed's sake, is SSL certs. You definitely would want SSL certs on your Jenkins instance that you're building. There are things like right here. This is a good resource right here on GitHub. A guy put together, how to Jenkins SSL, and that gets you need a domain name for that, which is kind of the largest piece that's difficult for us to do real quick in this demo. But then you can assign SSL certs. You can use Let's Encrypt, which is very popular for SSL certs, and you can get that nice padlock at the top. All right. So now we're going to unlock Jenkins. Password has been written to the log. So this is how they kind of prevent folks from getting to devices that they don't necessarily they shouldn't have access to when they haven't been set up yet. We can find it this way as well. Docker logs will show us for container 3323, and I'm just grabbing that from right over here from the container ID. There's our password to start things out. All right, and in this case, we're just going to install the selected plugins. So you can see it's pretty quick and easy to get Jenkins just up and running. It's I'll just stop here and say that one of Jenkins' both strengths and weaknesses are the number of plugins that it has. Jenkins has probably a 15-year history, and all of those plugins have accumulated over time. Unfortunately, some of them have been abandoned. Some of them are, I'm just going to skip and continue as admin here instead of creating an admin user. That's our Jenkins URL. Yep. Save and finish. Yep. Admin and the administrator password. That's fine. Start using Jenkins. All right. So we are set up to use Jenkins. It comes built in with a couple of build executors. Those are those workers that can run our builds. Those are two of them, and they're just running on the same machine as the Jenkins primary. So there are no builds created, so it's asking you, and they call them jobs. But you have some other options over here, and mainly the one that we'll be using is this Manage Jenkins one. But you can also see build history. You can see the people. You can give people usernames and passwords and have them log in and out, all that kind of good stuff. We don't need to create an agent or configure a cloud for distributed builds yet. We'll get there. So creating a job. In this case, we're just going to create a freestyle project. There are a couple of other kind of more advanced types of projects. You can read about them, but that's a freestyle project. We're just going to do a hello world here. All right. And then once you create a new project here, all right. Normally what you'd do is you'd set source code management to point at a Git repo or subversion repo or whatever that you're using. In this case, I'm just to get to a quick hello world, we're just going to set up a manual build step right here. And you can see you can add multiple build steps. In this case, we're just going to execute a shell script, and we're just going to do echo hello world. This will just be our quick and easy build step. You can see there's also the idea of pre-build actions, post-build actions. But here we go. Here we've got build history. We can do a build now. build is scheduled, very quickly the build will, excuse me, run on the executor, and it's already run and completed. In Jenkins default UI, blue means success. And in fact, there's a plugin that you can get to make it the green, green be a success. But and you can see here that we can see now this build successfully completed. We can go to the console output, which is right here, and we can see what it did. It ran as system, and it ran inside a container, and then ran hello world and finished as success. So perfect. So that is our first hello world step. We've got, you can, I think you can probably already see that, you know, if you had an embedded environment that you needed to build quickly, you install all your tools, and then you can configure it, change the build steps down here to run your tools as you need, and then you should be kind of up and running with Jenkins fairly quickly. All right, back to the slides. So step 2, that was step 2. So we've got the console output. Now we want to get into embedded CI. So now what I want to do is build a Nordic project via Sager Studio. So this gets into a number of different kind of tricky things that you kind of find, like you see someone do that hello world demo really quickly, and you realize, oh wow, it's pretty easy to get Jenkins set up, and this should be simple. Well, then when you add the flavor of embedded to it, things get a little tricky. So Sager Studio is an IDE that builds embedded projects that Nordic supports. And so your first challenge is Docker containers and virtualized environments don't really support IDEs and their graphical interfaces. And so oftentimes there's a lot of gymnastics that have to happen to figure out like what how to get Sager Studio or some of these other tools running in the command line. We've already done that at Dojo 5, and we have an environment that we set up that has this running. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a SSH key that we needed to connect to the DigitalOcean device. In this case, we're also going to set up a Jenkins worker that's going to actually do the build for us. And there is a new SSH key that we need to generate that will connect our Git worker and the Jenkins primary device. So we'll walk through creating that. I've got one created, but I think we've got time to just walk through it. Here, I'm going to create a new. All right. So yeah, we can just get rid of this. This is from the last time. All right, so okay, so we run this SSH keygen command. It generates what's called an ED25519 key. It's a fairly secure key right now and runs it 100 times. So you get to a pretty good place. We're just going to do empty for this passphrase. All right, now we've got a new set of keys generated, so that'll help us. And then we can hop into the, well, and yeah, and so then what happens is we need to kind of help along the worker that is going to be connecting over SSH to this primary, because the worker won't want to connect initially. So we will need to run these commands to kind of add the SSH key as a key that Jenkins can use. All right, so we're going to hop into our, I'm sorry, not there. We're going to go back to our DigitalOcean machine that's running our primary right now. We're going to basically hop into the container, the Jenkins container that's already running, and we're going to go into bin bash, or we're spinning up a bash prompt. So now this is inside the container that's running Jenkins, not on our primary machine. Then we're going to help it by setting up the SSH key. So this is all the good stuff that probably isn't on the initial instructions that you get. We're going to create so Jenkins home is where Jenkins runs out of inside of this container. We're going to create a .ssh folder inside of there. And then we're going to echo our new key, which is sitting over here. And this is our private key. All right. Into a file, and what do I need to call it again? Oh yeah, D5 worker primary. All right, so now we've got that key copied over. Now we should be able to SSH using that key file into the worker. We are not going to do that yet because we don't have the worker set up. We'll do that in just a sec. So, and we're also gonna, let's create the worker node real quick inside of DigitalOcean. We're gonna create another droplet. All right, from the marketplace, we're gonna go grab Docker. We keep all the options the same again. We need to add a new SSH key, and we're gonna add the public piece of the SSH key this time. So if we cat out the public piece, there we go. And then we can add that in. We'll give it a worker to primary. That's kind of representing. Not sure why it said something went wrong. That's a very helpful item, isn't it? Let's try refreshing. Oh, maybe I got signed out. That's neat. All right. I also want to be in New York. All right, new SSH key. E5 Jenkins, primary to worker. All right, so we're going to create it with that. We're going to call this Jenkins worker. All right, create the droplet. All right, so we're setting up our worker. That guy will be set up largely in the same way that we set up the first one. And then Jenkins has a way to set up that worker in a way that it'll kind of handle all the setup. Now we're ready. Now that we've got that worker set up, we can go back to the SSH step. And so here we are inside the primary, and this is important to do this from your Jenkins primary. We're going to SSH using the identity that we put together here. And we're going to go to root at what website? At this IP address. All right, and this is the key part. We need to be able to continue to say that we want to connect. Yep. Oh, look at that. Oh, okay. I guess one piece that I'm missing here is you need to change the permissions on that file. So 600 is a pretty good permission. That's locked down enough for this thing not to scream at us. All right. And there we go. Now we're into the worker from the primary, and we just had to do that once to kind of approve the fingerprint. Since now we've approved the fingerprint, we can get back out of it, and we're in a good place there. All right. Now, we also need to install Java on so that the agent can run. So I'm sorry, we do actually need to go back into the worker one more time. And sudo, we don't need to sudo apd update. So apt, if you haven't done package management on Linux, installs various packages. And then install, let's see which package. Default JRE. Doesn't take too long. Install a number of packages, and then he'll be set to go. Meanwhile, we can jump out to our Jenkins instance, and we're gonna install the DigitalOcean, or I'm sorry, Blue Ocean plugin, and that kind of gives you a more modern interface, and it also gives us pipelines, which is kind of a more modern way to do Jenkins stuff in general. So if we go to available and we go to Blue, Blue Ocean, and there is a lot of Blue Ocean ones, but we want Blue Ocean right here. And you'll see it pulls along with it a bunch of dependencies, which is nice. And then, yeah, Jenkins has this nice kind of GUI for watching what's going on with the plugins. And if we go back to the top of the page, now we have Open Blue Ocean as an option. And now we can see kind of the more modern Jenkins visualization of things. We can still see our hello world. We can still make it run. It still runs just fine. All right, so now we're ready to add a new worker inside of Jenkins. The way we do that, not that way. You go to administration. So there's kind of some nooks and crannies here, and you see that when we go to manage the Jenkins instance, we don't still get the nice Blue Ocean interface. We get we kind of get dumped back into the Jenkins world, the older Jenkins stuff. But here we go, manage nodes and clouds. We're going to create a new node. Node name is our Jenkins worker. This will be a permanent agent. All right, remote directory. So that's, we're just gonna call that var. I'm trying to remember if I want to make sure that I've got this. I'm calling out the steps for you guys. Yeah, create a worker node. All right. var Jenkins home. Or we can even just put it in var. It's just basically where on that root machine do we want it to put its temporary stuff. We're going to launch the agent by connecting it via SSH. All right, and here we provide the host name, credentials. We're going to add credentials, and let's see, we actually need to add those credentials as a SSH username with a private key file. All right. And so we're going to have it log in as root, enter key directly, and here we will enter our SSH key that we created. That's sitting over here. All right. see that. All right, so here's what we need to get this set up. Keep agent online as long as possible. We'll save that. Now what's going to do is it's going to go out to that Jenkins, to that machine that we had set up and install some of the Jenkins runner agent and then get it up and running. You can see, here we can watch, not there, but system information. So yeah, so it's already connected to it. Status, back to the list. So yeah, it's been able to connect to it already and has installed the Jenkins runner on it, found it. So we're all set to go. And in fact, we can even, and this is where some embedded stuff kind of comes into. You can see on that Jenkins worker, we still have, that Jenkins worker might be tied to like a hardware in the loop tester or some kind of other different environment. And so maybe we only want the builds running on the Jenkins worker and not on the master. So we can actually like disable the nodes that are on the master so that we don't try to run them there. And so now the only build executor or workers or nodes that are here are just the ones on the worker. So we can kind of force it to run on there. And we can double check that our hello world build still runs. This time it'll be running on the executor. Yep, and there we go. So it ran remotely on Jenkins worker. And perfect. All right, so let's get to our Nordic build now. So we are going to use this Docker image. And one of the cool things about Docker too is it makes it really easy to test some of the stuff locally. So let's go through that real quick. If you don't have Docker installed, no problem. It's pretty easy to install. Docker's website is a great resource for that. Yeah, so like we can run. We can drop into this image. It's a virtual file system. It has the Seger's tools installed and it's ready to go. So let's drop into it and see what it looks like. All right, and I've already downloaded it. I didn't need to grab the layers, but here we are inside of a virtual file system. You can see we've got one of the versions of the Nordic SDK, 15.2. That's the one I happen to tag. And then Seger Embedded Studio, that goes along with 15.2 is 3.50. So we've also got, we'll see under the, it's under SES, that's right, yeah. So under SES, we've got all the Seger Studio stuff. We didn't have to install it. It just kind of comes pre-installed. We're ready to go. So a lot of what you do with kind of this, what I call DevOps or embed ops kind of stuff is then you have to figure out, okay, what is the script? We got to write this glue logic that helps us run our code and compile it. And that's where I've done a little work ahead of time, but that's where some of the kind of magic happens, I guess. And so let's say we want to run a Blinky app. You'd figure out that, okay, in the Nordic SDK, they have a Blinky example. So let's jump into that directory. So here we are, now we've gone into that directory. And we've gone, in fact, into the directory where they have the Seger Embedded Studio build files. So if you've worked with Seger Studio, they use an EM session and an EM project file. But if you're using Kyle or IAR or some other, even GCC, you just go to the makefile section of things. And then this is the command that we can run from within the container to actually kick off the build. So we're telling Seger Embedded Studio run EM build, which is their command line build tool. Reference this project file that we're in, and then build the release configuration. And yeah, it doesn't give a lot of feedback, unfortunately. You'll find that with a lot of embedded tools. It's kind of command line is a second-class citizen to the GUI experience. But in this case, we now have an output directory, and we have a release directory, and inside of that directory, you have an exe directory, and inside of that directory, we finally have our ELF file and our hex file that we're typically looking for as embedded engineers. Where do those end up, and how do I get them to my device? All right, so then, and then the last step that we typically do is copy those artifacts. And so in CI world, they use the term artifact to be anything that you want to save from the file, from the project. So we'll copy those, and then workspace is an environment variable, and it's a special one that Jenkins sets up that points to where our workspace is. And things need to be in the workspace so that we can then later archive them with a glob. So, all right. So now what we need to do, now that we've kind of verified that these steps are going to work locally, now it's time to create our new job. We'll create a new, where did new job come from? New item, freestyle project. We could even do a pipeline in this case. Let's start with a freestyle project. So we could do Jenkins Nordic demo. All right, we don't really need to set up any of this necessarily, but we can add a builds. Well, and you know what? Because we're using Docker, this is where this gets a little interesting. So we can't use kind of these typical steps here. So what we want to do is set this up to hit Git, and we have a public repository that we set up so that we can grab these builds. And you can feel free to go grab this, play around with it, whatever you want. It is sitting right here at the Jenkins demo. All right, we don't need any credentials, and you can configure which branches you want to build. Anyway, there's a number of things that you can do. When does a build get triggered? Well, let's say it triggered after other projects are build periodically, pull SEM, and so and it can basically sit there and ask it every 5 seconds or so. You can see, if you hit the help, they'll kind of give you a lot of information on how to set up a build trigger. But basically, this is cron style stuff. So if we wanted to build, check every 5 minutes to see if somebody's pushed something, you can set that up. If you want to check every night, build triggers are probably better, honestly, to set up Jenkins. But because then it can be triggered right when somebody pushes. But in this case, we're just going to trigger it manually, but that's where you'd want to set that up. All right. So now, let's hit build now. So now what it's doing is it's jumping out to that Git repo that we set up, and it is first time build, skipping change log, commit message, added Jenkins file. So let's go to that website. We can just kind of talk through what we're seeing there too. So here's the Jenkins demo with the Jenkins file that I created. The Jenkins file, I can show how to set that up real quick, but it allows us to run under the Docker agent, which says that, hey, we're going to use an image to run our stuff, and then we can have different stages. Here's all the stuff that we discussed earlier built into these steps. And yeah, so now we've got a little bit more information. It didn't actually run. That's interesting. I'm not sure why that's not running, but anyway, let's jump over to our Blue Ocean view. And so now the Nordic demo is a special kind of project called the pipeline project. Actually, that's probably the problem. So let's if we jump into Blue Ocean and create a new pipeline, there we go. Now we're gonna point it at a Git repository and point it at this. So you can use the credentials to authorize itself with Git. We're just going to, we don't need to because this is public. Sure is taking a while. Okay. So it thinks that we don't have a Jenkins file in our repository, but we certainly do. That's on master. Well, seems like it's a little confused. Not sure why it's having trouble figuring that out. I would have expected it to be able to run that that pipeline project. Yeah, because it does see this Jenkins demo as a multi-pipeline project. This folder is empty. There are no branches found that contain build projects. So what it's talking about is this Jenkins file that that we in fact do have in our repository. Very interesting. Scan multi-branch pipeline log. Scan multi-branch pipeline now. Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is a good place to, you know, if any folks have any questions on anything in particular that you want to talk through or see, feel free to toss them into the chat. And we can talk about those as we're waiting for this to kind of figure itself out. Yeah, something's not quite healthy in our Jenkins demo. I'm not sure what quite happened here, but I wonder if it didn't like how we set it up. Yeah, within the repository, discover branches, delete untracked nested repositories, clean after checkout. Yep, and Jenkins file. I'll just say too that Jenkins file is something that's somewhat new to Jenkins. I mean, it's been around for a couple of years, but Jenkins itself has been around for 15. I think a lot of people recognize that kind of a movement about infrastructure as a code, I guess, and that really means like, you know, previously all of this configuration was stored in Jenkins, and so you kind of had two places where your information was stored. It was, you know, some of it was code and it was in your Git repo, and some of it was in Jenkins and its configuration files internally. And people realize, hey, this is less than ideal, especially if we change like build instructions halfway through our project. If we ever want to go back and build something from earlier, what are the instructions to build it? Do we remember? Do the tools and stuff remember that? So it became pretty much best practice, and now all the tools do this. Is they use a Jenkins, something like a Jenkins file, something that we check into the root of your directory, just like we've got it checked in here, called Jenkins file. And as long as it's there, Jenkins kind of recognizes it usually, and will build it. Yeah, I'm not sure. Jenkins is not loving it. Let's try one more time, and then we'll just wrap up. We'll do Git. We've got our repo, create pipeline. And maybe this is, and yeah, this is a public repo, so I shouldn't need credentials. Create the pipeline. Oh, there we go. Naming conflict. Yep. Test demo Jenkins. Fine. Yep. And creating the pipeline. This is where we got stuck last time. So I'll have to go back and check that out. I apologize for not having that. It's not working straight out of the box. But yeah, I guess just to wrap up the slides, embedded adds a number of challenges, like I mentioned. Compiler tools are sometimes Windows only. Hardware testing requires, local machines. Jenkins agent and Docker become critical to kind of manage that. Building Nordic project via Figure Studio success? Well, almost. I think we've got all the pieces in place, but something isn't quite working there. Some additional considerations that we tend to run into when setting up continuous integration for folks. And we typically, I should mention, we typically use EmbedOps, which is our kind of custom proprietary embedded focused tool. One of the challenges with using Jenkins or some of the other ones is that they're very much web focused and mobile focused, and so they optimize for those paths and tool chains. And so what we're doing is focusing really on the embedded piece. So setting these CI tool chains are much easier there. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or would like to see a demo of that. But yeah, additional considerations that are sometimes more difficult in a tool like Jenkins to set up, or just are unique to the embedded world: hardware-in-the-loop testing, over-the-air updates and deployment, manufacturing release process, so making sure that folks at the factory can get your hex files and get the right ones, and do that in an easy, automated way. Static analysis, so things like PC lint or static checkers, security checks, and vulnerability scanners are also a big thing. And then documentation generation. We work with some medical and safety critical clients, and generating documentation is a big part of getting through 510K or FDA kind of related activities, as well as other oversight committees for things in automotive and other safety critical areas. So those are all things that we're kind of unique to embedded, and sometimes present some challenges. I already mentioned Q&A. I haven't seen any questions come in, so we can do one more check here and see if Jenkins has figured itself out. Oh, it still thinks it's creating the pipeline, so I apologize. Not sure what's going on there, but I guess with that, I appreciate everyone's time, and thank you so much for joining us. We're doing a Lunch and Learn next week, and what is the topic again? I think it is security. I think it's on security and embedded devices. So I think tune in if that's a really interesting topic for you. Would love to have you. Trying to get more and more discussion about modernizing embedded and modernizing what we do in the embedded world. So thanks so much for your time, and hope to see you again soon.